Good afternoon. Now I'd like to hand over to Pete Allison for the interview stage of the Business Insights Network. Over to you, Pete.
Thanks, Guy, and thanks everybody, and it's great to meet you all. I'd like to start with a couple of apologies, actually. First of all, in the attendance data that went out, loads of errors, and I didn't even manage to try and get Leonard and Nita in there properly. I managed to copy over what we did last month, so I apologise. It's going to be completely confusing for everybody. But there's just another little layer again for anybody who's been seeing on social media, because we were going to be speaking this morning to Leonard, who we'll say hello to in a minute, and a chap called Richard Bryan, who's a product development manager in the digital sphere. But he called me yesterday and he's gone down ill. So another colleague and another person who's very closely involved in digital product development, Nita, very kindly and very generously responded to a note from me yesterday to say, Nita, I've got a seat that needs filling at no notice. And it just so happens that Nita and Leonard know each other very well. And slightly unexpectedly, given the lateness of the hour that I talked to her, she came back and said, yes, I can do that. So thank you very much, Nita. And you'll understand in a moment the significance of these two guys. Now, ever since we started anything that we're doing around the shows, Gloucester Business, South Gloucester Business Show and Business Insights, innovation and new product development has been a key focus. It's come and gone in the way things do in terms of how we've tackled it. But the raw truth that we realised very early is that literally any business anywhere, however much they may or may not think they are, is involved in innovation. And the example I use is, you know, if you look at the window cleaner who says, no, mate, I just clean windows. You said, well, there was a point in time when you said to yourself, I know what I could do. I could buy a ladder and I could buy a cloth and I could go and clean some windows and earn some money out of it. He said, well, yes, that was on that day and that happened. He said, well, that's innovation. That's having an idea and saying, I could commercialize that. I could bring it into the marketplace and I could do something useful that's relevant in my life for it. And that's the sort of fairly basic level start point. We then move through all sorts of discussions around innovation, and there's culture of innovation and process of innovation. And there's a significant business in South Gloucestershire who really focus on culture innovation, and they say innovation is what we live and thrive on. And even the guys who go and clean the bathrooms, if there's something in the wrong place that makes your job last a bit longer, talk to us about it. Tell us that we just need to move that, because it's in everybody's interest if we innovate and we do it in a better way tomorrow. And that when I had that conversation a long time ago, that rang home, and actually the whole of business is about innovation. So I'm going to welcome into this conversation Leonard and Nita, and although both have had a chance to say who they are, I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself again, but just tell us a little bit more in a focused niche way about what your business is and where it's at in its life and how it works and what you actually do. And I'm just going to let Leonard go first, because hopefully Nita as well will make more sense if you've heard from Leonard first. So Leonard, just tell us a little about you and Awaretag and what's actually going on in your world.
Yeah, well, firstly, I think probably all know it's been on the news recently. Damp and mold in homes, particularly in social housing, is a big issue. It's an issue that's been around for a long time. It's always been here, and I think particularly in the UK, it's a big problem because the weather. You know, we just have these crazy spikes and changes in weather. It's damp, humid, it's sometimes sunny. Our housing stock is really quite old as well. Even our new stuff, when it's built, it needs to withstand environments that weren't really considered they needs to withstand. So our starting point when we looked at this big problem around buildings, our starting point was there's lots of people doing sensors out there, and we built sensors as well. But the thing about the whole problem is it's almost like you know, when you watch the weather, you watch your weatherman, weather girl, whatever, somebody's showing the weather map of the UK, and you see all these isobars and all these different things. I don't really understand it. Not many people do understand these how close they need to be and all that sort of good stuff. It's the same thing with houses. You speak to a surveyor, you speak to an energy efficiency advisor, you speak to repair guy, you speak to a double glazing salesperson or fitter, they've all got their own view of what is happening in a house that's causing it to go mold, damp, condensation, and it's just crazy. So we just thought let's I don't know if you've ever seen The Martian, that film, but you know, let's science them out of this. You know, there's a whole bunch of science that's been done about how buildings perform, but none of it has been published in a way that people understand. And so what I did is assembled a team of mathematicians, AI specialists, robotics, and also product developers as well, and UI and UX developers, because what we wanted to do is if we are going to use the science, the published science within the academic world and also within BRE and other big institutions, if we're going to take that and distill it down into something that everybody can use, then it can't just be here's a bunch of equations and this is what it is. There's also got to be that whole experience of I feel better because I'm educated about how my house works and therefore I'm more empowered to then make it better.
Brilliant.
That's the key thing for us. It was, you know, I think Nita talked about it earlier, but for us, it was all about how do you improve knowledge? How do you, amongst everybody, how do you make it so that people are empowered, that they have their own data and they can, with that data, it's a single source of truth. But how can they also share that data? So those things are really, really important. A bit complicated to put all together because, you know, we're talking about you know, people's motivations, you're talking about science, you're talking about electronics, you're talking about AI, all mashed together. But that's what we did. And we did that for the last 2 years. We're now getting to the stage where some of the models that we've created, you know, 3D models and the predictions are really, really accurate. We now realize that nobody else has taken what we've done to the degree that we have. We've kind of hidden our work under a bushel a bit, and we've been told off by so many investors saying, you just don't pitch very well, but when I see what you've done, you know, all that sort of good stuff. So we've got to get better at pitching. But I think what we're now at is at the root of what we're doing is how are we gonna stop this this confrontational conversation that's between tenants and landlords, and how are we going to find a better way for people to actually solve the problem together.
Brilliant. And we'll come back and we'll look at them in it and some of those issues that you've been facing going along the way. What I want to do at this point, though, is just ask Nita to introduce yourself and the actual job that you do in this sphere of innovation and product development, because you've got a pivotal role, certainly in the South Gloucestershire area. So Nita, going to tell us a little bit about how you fit into all this. You're on mute at the moment.
Thank you, Pete. I work for South Gloucestershire Council as sort of like a technology specialist for the council, and what I was able to get the trust from our senior leadership team to go and build a IoT research and development testbed. It's an open programmable testbed to support and drive innovation. So it's not just for startups, academics or local authorities, so public, private sectors. It's about everybody coming together to collaborate and develop and innovate and come up with the future solutions, the future product development that can help the societal challenges that we're all facing. And I think one of the things that is quite unique from a South Gloucestershire perspective is we have at least 5 innovation hubs in the Northern Fringe, and what we have done through our network called Umbrella is to join those innovation hubs together, from the National Composite Centre to the Bristol and Bath Science Park to Bristol Robotics, our IAPS development, which is also looking to do hydrogen there, also bringing in UE and Future Space, which are like innovation incubators as well. By linking those up, we've built a network which allows anyone to access the network through through a internet connection. You physically don't need to be in South Gloucestershire, and you have a variety of technologies that you can use to develop your products. And we were lucky enough recently to won some community renewal fund through which we've supported 10 SMEs to develop their products. Our key thing around the innovation piece is, with COVID-19, we all learned that our worlds are getting more and more interconnected. In that interconnected world, one individual, one organization will not be able to deliver a solution for problems that are out there. So you need a safe space through which to think through your ideas and collaborate in order to develop a product. And that product, at the end of it, is something that is viable and it's tested in a real world environment. So that's what we're trying to do within South Gloucestershire. And what we've done is, the architecture is not that you can only do it in South Gloss, but our promotion around it is you could replicate this in any other location and grow this, because as UK PLC says, the SMEs and the startups are going to be the lifeblood for UK in terms of GDPR growth and that. So it's like trying to find a way to promote that. And from a selfish reason, for a local authority, it's nice to be able to put forward some of our challenges that we are facing as a public sector organisation, to say, how can SMEs, academia, research help us to try and address those climate changes, those challenges, whether it's climate change, carbon zero, all of these things, with the reducing budget, aging population. So the touch points are very big. So that's what, our passion is around that.
Brilliant, well done. And it's interesting and great to hear that word collaboration come in. It's so important sometimes when you're trying to build an idea. Everyone, so I'm going to tease out a few questions here, give you both a chance to answer them. Everyone in the business here, on the call here, is in business in one shape or form. Businesses depend on ideas and creative thinking to develop and move forward. You guys are in that world of innovation and creative ideas. So just in a couple of sentences, or whatever you feel comfortable with, I'd just be interested to hear from each of you. How does that process start? When's that light bulb moment? How did it occur for you? How have you seen it occur in others? That suddenly goes, do you know, there might be something we could do with that, and off we go. Leonard, you go first. What happened with you? You're on mute.
I think we probably agree. There's probably two reasons. One is necessity. You found yourself in a spot and you need to get yourself out, and people do and innovate and create new stuff because they need to move forward and they need to get out of a tight spot. And the other, you've got a bit of an itch. You just see an injustice, you see something that's a big gap, and you just want to go for it. And it's interesting. I was up in Sunderland a couple of weeks ago. We had dinner with some other co-founders and we're all doing different things. And one of the guys there, he wants to make this particular piece of electronics. I mean, and this other co-founder, we knew the pain that he was about to put himself through. And we just couldn't say to him, don't do it, because he's got this itch. It's in manufacturing that he wants to go, and he could see there was an injustice within, not injustice, but as a thing that was just bugging him for years. We went, just go for it. Because we know on that journey, and we're still learning it, on that journey, you may change. You'll discover new things. You'll be influenced by other things. But you just got to take the journey. And it is necessity, or you just got an itch. And those are the things that I think I'm taking away so far.
Yeah, and I think something that's coming up through what you're saying there and how you're saying it is the word passion. And quite often, and so often in this world of innovation, that word passion and what people are passionate in comes in. Nita, what's your take on, you're overseeing a network of people doing this stuff. What have you observed from that position in terms of watching these things suddenly ping into life?
I think what we've learned and what I've learned personally is there is no daft idea. You know, every idea has merit, to be honest. But what you need is to be able to talk to, whether it's experts or somebody else, who just walk through that idea, you know, and they can sense check bits for you. They can give you some guidance, because you may not follow you might not know about some of the pitfalls in some areas or other areas, but also that there may be funding streams available for you to tap into to build that out. There may be some specialist that you can engage with, whether it's in an incubator kind of environment that you can go to and work with. There's also the links that you can have or try and form through the public sector and through the private sector as well in developing your idea. I think fundamentally, if the idea is trying to resolve a real world problem, I think people do succeed in that side. I think where if you're trying to be the latest iPhone developer, you know, Apple kind thing, I think some of those spots have been taken, you know, worldwide, and it's hard to compete in those spaces. But that doesn't mean that you can't focus on a small piece. And the way you can do that is that collaboration. I think collaboration and having that open, trusted environment through which you can do that collaboration, I think it's pivotal. And that in itself is also a great place to then help provide the education side in terms of developing our future workforce, you know, because like the world today, you know, coming from a public sector, our care workers of today may not need to have that technology knowledge. However, the care workers for the future will have to have a lot more, but those roles are going to change. So there's probably about 85% of new roles we don't even know exist right now that will come through in the next 5-10 years. So it's like, how do we harness and learn from it?
Yes, and how do we spot those holes in the marketplace when they're coming along in the sector we're in? I want to come back to the word passion that we were using a minute ago. And, you know, again, I can tell, you know, from your voice and everything that you're quite passionate about making these collaborations and these things work. The problem with passion, of course, as we all know in business, is that if you look at it subjectively, you will always, you know, at any level of business, you have to believe in your business. If you don't believe in your business, you got a starting problem before you get going. So you have to believe in your business almost by definition. So therefore, if you say, I think this is a great idea, and you look at yourself and you agree with yourself, say, yes, I think that's a wonderfully good idea, and you're passionate about it and you believe in it, you start off down that road. But if you're the only voice at the table, then there is always the danger that fundamentally it wasn't a good idea and you were the one who didn't spot it. So what I want to just ask both of you, when that idea comes along and you kind of convince yourself that this is something you want to go at for whatever reason, how do you stress test it? How do you decide? How do you get that voice of reason into the discussion that says, hang on a minute, really? Or no, actually, that's a really good thing. Let's go for that. How do you achieve that to a point? Because you're about to invest an awful lot in it. Nita, I'll ask you to pick that one up first. What do you reckon?
I think you have to do some idea analysis around this in terms of the time, effort required, the kind of things you will need access to, the kind of resource you'll need available. Just doing a simple spreadsheet to put some of those cost elements in, but also timeline and what kind of things you will need starts to formulate, you know, how difficult or how simple and what are the timelines within which you want to try and do this. And if you yourself do not have the funds to do this.
Have we got you? Oh, Nita?
It's probably one of the big things I would, you know, the simple question of what is the challenge that you're trying to solve here with this innovation?
Okay. Leonard, what's your take on that question?
I'll give you a story. again, up in Sunderland, we were doing this accelerator, and we had some big global investors and big telecommunications companies out there. And one of the guys said, just excite me with an idea. And that's the key. If you can't articulate your idea, this passion that you've been bottling up and you've been trying to get off the ground, if you can't articulate to other people and they can't get excited about it, well, it's not really, it's your hobby. It's not an idea that they can follow. And that's really important for me, and not just people, customers and investors, but also people who want to come into the business as well. Because it's really hard. It's really hard to get people to come into the business if they don't get what you're all about and where you're trying to go. It's really hard. And we're trying, we've got 2 PhD guys just started with us, and they're just all fired up because they can see exactly where we're going. They're all kind of keen to do stuff which I'm having to hold them back from doing. But it's turning that passion into something that other people can run with and feel part of. And yes, and Nita, you're absolutely right. Then you've got to make sure, is it viable? And there's still lots of unknowns, because when we first started, we thought, yeah, we're just going to go and buy some electronics off the shelf. The electronics didn't exist, so we had to build it. And then when you go to people and say, look, I want to build this, they have no idea how to build it, so we had to just take a punt. But that first step of speaking to friends, family, people in the pub, anybody, and you say, I've got this idea, wouldn't it be great if, and if I could do that, how would your life be different?
Yeah,
and I think you feel that, then it's good.
I can absolutely see that, and actually that takes me back to the situation I realised a few years ago. Now I was thinking about this, but I just come to it again now. And as I said, my original career in the music industry all those years ago. Now I'm not as a musician or a record company, but around enough people. And we all know the story of artists who've done demo tapes and things and put them in, and they got rejected a million times. And it's the same thing with authors and books. And actually, it's the ability when that piece of music or that book lights the igniting fire with the person who's going to back you is so important.
Yeah.
And what's actually happening now, apart from the fact you're looking to turn it into something that's going to generate money, but what's also happening is you're taking something which is your passion, you create the piece of music, you create the writing, you made the invention, and you're demonstrating it, you're showing it to a third party who's not coming from that passion position. They're coming from a slightly more hard-nosed business position, and if you manage to ignite their passion, then we're off and away. And I think that's a really interesting, but I do think it's important that we understand when we have these ideas about how we move business forward, that we know how we're going to stress test them. Because
and I think the stress test is you're going to have a customer, but that customer has got their own customers. So if you can ignite that passion in down the chain, then you're doing fairly well. We're still on that journey, so we haven't made the millions and billions yet.
And it's worth remembering all those times when people rejected the thing that the next person took on and did really well out of. So
exactly,
you get a rejection.
Because I still remember back in 2019 when we had to sit in front of government digital services, Leeds Council, some other consultants, and there's a room of 100 people, and we stood up on stage and said, we see a future where processing is done on the edge. We have federated learning and all that sort of stuff that's not done in the cloud. We see a future where you own your own data, and that as a council, you're going to have to ask people for their data. And it's almost as I could see tomatoes coming from the from the audience. But there's one person from government digital services nodding in the back. And it's interesting. That was back in 2019. It's interesting that a couple of years later, there was an article written by government digital services about data privacy and data agency. I thought, well, it's getting through. But now we've got to try and exploit that before other people do.
So another question then that I just want to see what you both think of, and maybe we'll look for some questions a little bit after this, is when we have a bright idea, when you had that light bulb moment, inevitably you're probably doing something else at the time. possibly it's not the moment where, as you referred earlier, Leonard, where you've got a tight corner and you're actually thinking about creative solutions. I'm looking at the moment where you're trucking along, you're doing something, going, do you know, we could do something with that. And then we've all had the experience with our business situations where we've kind of decided we're going to go off on a track. We're trying to do this thing over here. We're building a bit of time to do that. And actually balancing our time and our resource, create a new idea to take it to a point where we can actually make something out of it. It can be a real challenge. Is that something you guys are related to? And is that something which you've felt that you've balanced or got wrong or got right as you've gone on the way as you put new product in there? If I just ask Nita maybe to take that one first, and see what, because Nita, you're observing it from someone who's putting guidance in, and then I'm sure Leonard will have a story from us from a very personal angle.
I just think the biggest challenge is getting someone to believe in your idea and doing that. I think just even building our test bed was a challenge, because you're talking to people who will either say to you, I don't get technology, I don't understand it, just go away, because you have your day job to do as well as your thinking that you're trying to do to deliver the value that can be achieved. I think ultimately is if you can grasp at one aspect that the person you're talking to or the group you're talking to can link up with, and you can then step through how that idea, that innovation could change their lives, whether it, you know, improve or expand or whatever, then that means people will be more open to listening to you, to broaden their understanding and doing that collaboration with you. So from our side, it's that idea selling, and the reason why we built the test bed is, as a startup, as a academic, or as a hobbyist, you know, people have fantastic ideas, but the biggest thing they don't have access to, in our case, in certain areas, is real world data. Because if you have some real world data, you can then do your innovation around it. And that's what we've tried to do, is to provide that innovation space for them to think through. And people may look at data in different ways, and they innovate in different sectors because of that data.
So Leonard, in terms of setting up Awaretag, how have you fitted that into your world? You know, if you go back to the point where you couldn't necessarily fund your own time on it all, how did that get itself to a point where you could, you know, take time on it?
That's my wife. Yeah, I think like I tell you, anybody, wife, husband, girlfriend, partner, any co-founder will tell you, and yeah, any founder will tell you that you do need a supportive family or friends, because there's going to be, you know, when we really started in earnest, it was right at the very beginning of COVID, and we had to redesign the electronics so that we could actually deliver it in the post. We had a focus on doing electronics, and then we thought, well, actually, that's just too hard. I mean, really, the value's in the AI and the machine learning. So we had to pivot. But in doing that, you're having to, when you've got family and friends, or family particularly around you, who are egging you on to keep going, but then you change and they've got no control, or they can't help with that change. It's kind of upsetting for them, and you've got to be aware of that. But also you've got to be quite clear that this is part of the journey. You can't, there's never going to be a singular road that you go down and you check each milestone and you get to the end. It's not going to happen that way. There's going to be moments you're going to come on down a bank a bit, and you have to scrub yourself back out again. You have to adapt, and that's what we've had to do.
Yeah, so I'd love to open this up a little bit now to the other people in the meeting, and do feel free to chip in. But have you any of the rest of you got examples of new idea in a business, a thing that came along and you actually had to work out how to make it happen and how to get it to a point where it was a viable piece in its own right. Has anyone got any insight to any of that? The room goes really quiet. Guy, go on, you fire away.
Well, I alluded to it earlier in the preamble that we had. We at Informa Publishing in London in 2000, early 2000, we launched a magazine called Bluetooth World on the back of Mobile Comms International, because we knew Bluetooth was coming, but nobody knew what format it was going to be. And I'm sure Leonard, for instance, will potentially remember the fact that there was an awful lot of infighting, even down to the frequencies that were going to be used for it. You had Nokia on one side of the Baltic, and you had Sony Ericsson or Ericsson on the other side of the Baltic, and they both had a veto on each other. So you had this thing that was going to work wonderfully well, but nobody had a clue about how it was going to work, and there was tons and tons of politics involved as well. But what we managed to, and there's an example of something that obviously had boundless utilizations and has got far more utilizations than are actually being used today. But nobody, but then there were tons and tons of people with different types of foresight, but no one was bringing it all together. And that was one of the reasons why we started the magazine, and we got involved in the Congress as well, to make a meeting point there for everyone to try and start talking about this great thing that people were all talking about, and to try and get it working together.
Brilliant.
And there's an example.
Yeah, and I saw both Gino and Lee come off mute at some point, so I'm going to invite Gino first.
I'll barrel in.
Lee, you fire away. Go on, Lee.
I didn't press my mute button quick enough. I feel like I'm on a quiz show. Innovation. I mean, our recruitment business, we had to innovate heavily when COVID hit. It was do or die, like many businesses. And that's why I'm really excited about what's going on at the moment. I'm one of the few people that thinks, all right, we're going through a tough time. Economy's in a mess. People are getting the pinch. Putin's doing his thing down in Ukraine. But this is when innovation happens. 2008 is when innovation happens.
Yeah.
Backs to the wall, people innovate. When things are great, people get into their comfort zones. And comfort's one of the three worst things you can have in business. Yeah. And we all go into our comfort zones. When your back's against the wall, people innovate and they develop. And we did it back when COVID kicked in. We used to be a 100% hospitality recruitment company. That's what I set it up as in 2018, because I used to be an ex-chef many, many years ago. Hospitality closes. That's it. Game over. We're out of business. No, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? We picked up Amazon. We innovated our systems. Amazon burned through human beings really quickly. We came in incredibly low cost, £100 a driver. Find a recruitment company that charges you 100 quid, not at home. And we made very fast recruitment systems and very straight to it recruitment systems, which has enabled us to grow exponentially as a business now as we come out of COVID, because now we're ahead of our competition because we're faster, we're more efficient, and we get better results at a far smaller cost. Now I just need to innovate over the bad reputation that recruiters have and try and come over that.
I think you make a really important point there. And of course, we can all relate to that whole thing with COVID. And I mean, I doubt there's anyone that's in the room here who can't look at that moment. And it relates back to what Leonard was saying earlier about when you're in the pinch, in a tight spot, you innovate. Well, COVID was just one hell of a tight spot for just about everybody. So I relate to that. And that's really good. Gino, you were going to pop something, I think, there.
Yeah, so a lot of thoughts, and thank you everybody for sharing your insights. It's always great because you immediately start making connection in your head. I mean, I had ideas, business ideas in the past, and for example, once I remember thinking, wouldn't it be great if instead of owning a car, you could just swipe your credit card to a car and just drive off. Obviously, that's now been done with e-scooters, but this was 15 years ago, when, just thinking of a technology that, like you said, it didn't exist, but the concept was there. I think we've all had situations, experiences where we felt frustrated and we thought the cause of this frustration is this problem. If we can solve this problem, we've got a business. But then I also think what we were saying earlier about, pressure testing, and, I don't get Billie Eilish. I'm sorry if I offend anyone, but I don't get it. But
Not alone.
I'm an old man, and perhaps that's why.
That's being ageist.
So, but you're right. The market was responding unexpected ways, and the market, unfortunately, is the one that pays your bills. But do we want to sort of follow the market? Sometimes you think of consumers, and you think GDP. Yeah, it's a statistic, it's data, it's sales. But what if we're just selling, vaping and drinks, and people are basically consuming these and being antisocial in corners of the streets? That's still GDP? It's still measured as GDP, as wealth, but is it really doing any good for society? I don't know. It's a question. But then you're at the other end of the spectrum. You've got businesses that never changed. Think of something that goes well with crepes, goes well with toast, goes well with ice cream, anything. Nutella. Okay. So their mission was to keep it the same, always, never change. If you look at the branding, if you look at the format, if you look at the jar, they never changed it. Once they got the recipe right, that was it. They found the perfect balance between sugars, fat, and chocolatey and creaminess and texture. You name it, the smell. Everyone lived that initial opening of the jar and went into heaven, and that's it. Why change? So you've got arguments for innovation, arguments for keeping things consistent, and the market sometimes wants things that are not necessarily the best for the future. So
I think
it's a tough gig.
To add to that, it's interesting. For a startup, we could have just gone down the road of saying, let's make a cheaper, smaller sensor, and then just sell them, ship them high, stack them high, ship them out.
Yeah.
And I said, no, we want to actually create a demand for something that you don't even know that you need. So I'm not going to say, we're going to be like Apple, but we took back in 2019 this idea of, we see a future where people own their own data, can share and collaborate, and we can get things done better. And it's still there. That thread is still there.
Yes.
Yes, along the way that we deliver it is slightly different, because we're now focusing more on the AI rather than the hardware. But for a startup, for us, we chose to try and change the market slightly. And it's been hard, really hard.
Yeah.
But you get really, really good feedback. You start working with some big housing associations and some energy companies. But boy, does it take a toll. This I used to look 16, honestly.
So we're going to need to draw this to a close, guys. It's a really, really fascinating discussion there. And it does, that last set of points, I have to say, there's a great tension that you can see play out left, right and centre about, do I constantly think about innovating and changing and bring with that a bit of disruption and destabilization, or do I create something stable and solid and reliable and dependable and always there, run the risk of going off the boil and not innovating and suddenly realizing that you're out of date? And neither of those, as simplistic things, are right or wrong. It's a blend and it's a balance. You get all the different, disruptive innovation, open innovation, all these kinds of collaborative innovation games. Discussions for another day, really fascinating discussions. It's why we always keep innovation on the thing of the show. Now, just a couple of moments ago, Guy did have his hand up to put a last comment in, but actually what I'm going to do here is hand over to Guy, who's going to run the next piece, and let him have his closing comment and go for it. Guy, but thank you all. Thank you, Nita. Thank you, Leonard. That was really...
Thank you.
Guys,
apologies, I need to head off to another call.
I need to head off
as
in
well.
about 5 minutes. So I've got our Chinese well, anyway, yeah, I've got to speak to some suppliers. Sorry about that. Yeah. So,
No
yeah.
Thank you all. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Nita. Thanks for everything.
Great, thanks, Nita. Great. One thing I would say, Gino, in your analogy about Nutella, yes, they have kept Nutella the same, although the ingredients do vary from country to country, continent to continent.
Yeah.
They try and maintain the flavour. One thing, and they've always kept it the same, one thing that Ferrero have done extremely successfully down the years is incorporated Nutella into other products.
Yeah.
So Nutella was around for a long time before Ferrero Rocher, before all of the various different harder scented chocolates as well. Unlike an awful lot of people, I'm a real fan of Ferrero Rocher. I think they are brilliant. You know, there's a certain baseness about Ferrero Rocher which is just great. In fact, this golf comp I was at yesterday, the partner I was playing with, you have to take a present in worth about £5. I took a bottle of wine in, and she took a box of Ferrero Rocher, and she said, when we come to getting our prizes, if you can point out the bottle of wine that you got, because I'm sure it'd be quite good because your wife chose it. I said, that's fine, but you make sure you point out the Ferrero Rocher because I'll have them. So I've now got Ferrero Rocher under the tree. So yeah, there's that adaptability you get when you do get a meal.